Hello and welcome back to the Form is Temporary podcast, and it's episode 2, Game Week 2 preview for the 2024-25 season. Game Week 1 is in the books. We've had a weekend of data, a weekend of matches to, look out for the best players and get that eye test and really use a few of those action picks to really think about going into Game Week 2. And we're delighted to say that for the Game Week 2 preview, we've got on a very special guest, very well known in the FBL community. He's very much a big presence on social media, on X especially. So I'm very delighted to say that joining us for this Game Week 2 preview, we've got BigMan Bakar. Bakar, how are you today?
Hi, man. Thanks for having me. Hello and welcome to all the listeners and viewers. I'm all good. I'm looking forward to the discussion, actually. You just sort of ran me through the agenda, and there are a lot of interesting talking points. So looking forward to the next hour or so.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, Bakar, to have you on.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. So, yeah, going to be a really exciting one, this one. Looking ahead to Game Week 2, some interesting fixtures on the horizon for sure. And to talk through that with me is, once again, my co-host, Chris. How are you, Chris?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you, Roberto. Yeah, thank you for having me. Nice to be back. Interesting Game Week 1. So I'm hoping this podcast can whet the appetite for Game Week 2.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll have a little look back on the weekend that was and what it might mean going into Game Week 2. Another interesting point of note is that the deadline will be a Saturday deadline this week. So 12:30, Brighton, Man United being the early kickoff. So we've got a bit longer to tinker with our teams, if we do at all, because an FPL kind of tradition down the years is to not make any transfers in Game Week 2 and roll to have 2 free transfers. But you never know, things could crop up in our teams that we might want to deal with, and a lot of players have been dropping in price, which I'm sure we'll get onto. So we'll start off with a little look back at Game Week 1, and we'll start with you, Bakar, if that's all right. What was your kind of main highlights from your team in Game Week 1, and what was your points really from your 11?
Yeah, so the Game Week 1, it was a bit disappointing, to be very honest. I think I ended up on 58 points. Was it 58, 57 points, something like that? I had Poro though, so the Game Week was looking quite bad, to be very honest, till Monday evening. And then on Monday Night Football, when Poro scored, it looked a lot more respectable than I thought it would. So I'll take it. There were a lot of things which sort of happened which I had no control of. And generally, ever since I've sort of gotten into content creation over the years, one thing that I've sort of come to peace with is that I just try and switch off after the deadline has passed, as long as I'm happy with my decision making, with the information available at the time of the deadline. I don't necessarily berate myself over decisions which don't go my way with the knowledge of hindsight, because I don't think that's the right way of playing this game. So, for example, even when you look at this week, I had Eberechi Eze. I mean, he was a perfectly viable pick. If he didn't have that, goal disallowed from the free kick, then, the outcome of the week would have looked different. Similarly, I captained Isak. Newcastle got, a red card after 20-25 minutes. Konza got hooked after halftime, which is very unusual for a centre back. I mean, I expect him to start, which he did. Then he got hooked. Bruno Fernandes ended up missing a couple of sitters. So, I mean, these kind of things is sort of, they sort of compounded in one single week, which isn't ideal. But these sort of things can happen. But as long as the decision-making process is right, I think I will probably fare better in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? That's the problem with football. Sometimes it can be unpredictable and these things can happen. But you'd hope over a course of an FPL season, these things will even out, and variance, as a lot of people like to say, will kind of be a bit less severe as the weeks go on. But as you say, someone like a Bruno Fernandes looked very threatening in that opening game at against Fulham. And yeah, at the end of the day, we have players who want to get into good positions. We want players to be creating chances. I mean, 6 goal attempts for Bruno against Fulham and 2 big chances. I mean, he definitely looked threatening. And another day, he converts one of those, and you're looking potentially at a big haul, because yeah, he did look threatening, didn't he, Chris?
Yes, no, I was watching the game, and he had a couple of, like you said, 2 big chances, which on another day, potentially against a worse goalkeeper, he may have actually found the net. So it's so many uncontrollable variables that you just can't account for. So I'd like you say, Roberto, I think the positive is that he's getting into those positions and he's looked threatening in that first game week. And yeah, hopefully that's a sign of things to come for Bruno owners.
Yeah, and when you look at Manchester United's fixtures, they do still have some nice fixtures there. I mean, Brighton away is going to be interesting based off their opening game against Everton. They absolutely demolished them and scored a lot of goals. Manchester United, we know, conceded a lot of chances last season, so it won't be an easy game for maybe those Man United defenders. But Brighton also can be a team quite open at the back. They're quite an expressive side, so you could see some Manchester United players like a Bruno, like maybe a Rashford who did disappoint in game week 1. Maybe he could come good. I actually got Rashford in my own team. Just picking him is a little bit of a differential because I went to Fantasy Football Fest before the game week 1 deadline, and I wanted to have some kind of differential playing in that match. And I just looked at Garnacho, and actually, to be fair, I had Garnacho before the deadline, but when we got the news of Ahmad starting and a possible benching for Garnacho, I felt it was worth taking that twist on Rashford. But after reflection, maybe he's one of the problems that could leave my team in game week 2, and a switch to someone like an Eberechi Eze or a Brian Mbeumo could be on the cards. But I don't think Rashford is the worst pick. What do you think about that, Bakar? Because he's quite an out there one, isn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, he should have had an assist actually when Garnacho missed that open goal. So I think he's a good differential, to be very honest. I mean, looking at your team, I think he's the sort of player you've picked who can help you rise above the ranks, because he's not someone I've seen in a lot of teams. He's actually a big differential. And you actually have him over Bruno. So that's interesting to see. But I think he's a good pick. And if I was in your position, I would just keep the faith with him and just play him in the weeks to come.
Yeah, hopefully the kind of potential points on offer there with those fixtures, with Brighton and Southampton coming up, he might be able to cash in with some of those points. Chris, how did you get on in your game week 1 team? Because I know we talked about it last week. You had a few decisions you were unsure about, but what was your kind of final 11 and what the main things that stood out from game week 1 for you?
So similar to Bakar, really, it was a solid, if not spectacular, start to the season for me. I ended up with 55 points, and yeah, I mean, I'm not too displeased with that total. Could have been better, obviously, but I think some of the main takeaways from my team was that the defense performed very well. I had Gabriel and Gvardiol, who both obviously kept clean sheets for their teams. I had Henderson in goal, which Bakar was talking about kind of the decision-making process, and if you've kind of made the right decisions using the information you've got, then you can feel better. With Henderson, for me, is a bit the opposite, to be honest, because I said actually last week in the pod that I was a bit unsure about the Palace defence, whilst all the transfer speculation was surrounding Gahey and Anderson, and I didn't know whether that might have an impact on kind of their performance. And from what I saw against Brentford, they did look very vulnerable. So that's a bit of a shame that I initially had Sells in goal, who obviously Forest didn't keep a clean sheet either, but they have some nice fixtures coming up. So that's a bit of a one where I'm thinking, maybe should have gone the other way. But now we've got to just go with Henderson, and hopefully he can keep some clean sheets in the subsequent weeks. In midfield, I had Salah in my team as vice captain, so obviously a good return for him with a goal and an assist, and just generally, as he always does in game week 1, he looked very threatening. So yeah, he's definitely one I'm looking forward to owning over the next few weeks. And then I also had Son as another premium bracket midfielder who, yeah, that was a bit of a disappointing one, because even though Spurs did seem to create a lot of chances on Monday, he was on the periphery, really. He didn't really get involved. I saw a post by Sam Bonefield saying that he was playing really out wide. So I'm hoping that come the next game against Everton, with obviously they've got Ashley Young suspended as well. So I'm hoping that potentially there might be more kind of output from Son from that side. They might target the Everton's right back, which I think will be Coleman, I would imagine.
Yeah, Holgate is there as well. I think maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you've got an Everton defence of Holgate, Michael Keane,
It's a bit makeshift, isn't it? So I'm going to keep him definitely for game week 2, but there's a lot of Spurs assets which I'm sure we'll talk about who are really appealing. I also had Daiki Kamada, who I talked about as a differential last week. Obviously, only got 1 point, so not great, but it's not. I'm not too worried about that. He played. He did come off after about 70 minutes, which it's not terrible. I think he'll probably start next game, so we'll give him another opportunity. And then I had Morgan Rogers, who I thought was really unfortunate to only end up with the 2-pointer. He had a few chances, and I thought he looked really good, to be honest. So I was encouraged by his performance and Adam Armstrong as well. Obviously, they were playing a 10-man Newcastle defence, but so you've got to bear that in mind. But he had a few half chances where potentially on another day he could have gone on the score sheet. So those two I'm quite encouraged by. They'll be staying in. And then I had Isak and Haaland up front. Haaland, obviously, that was a big talking point going into game week 1, whether you own him or not. I think a lot of people who don't own him now will be going into game week 2 with a bit of apprehension with the Ipswich fixture. But, and then Isak was a little bit disappointing as captain, only getting 5 points, but with the red card so early on, and I think they ended up with 22% possession. It's pretty miraculous that he ended up getting any kind of contribution. So I'm going to take that as a positive, really. But not the best week, but not the worst either.
Yeah, it's interesting. You make a few observations there, Chris. And Bakar, do you think with someone like Oscar Bob, who obviously a lot of people were on at the start of the season, he got ruled out with injury, around that kind of 5 million, 5.5 price point, do you think that maybe with the way he played in that West Ham game that Morgan Rogers does stand out as that best option, because with Villa's fixture turn in game week 3, maybe could provide a lot of value for people's teams?
For sure. And I've had him in a lot of my drafts in preseason. And in fact, I was only sort of forced to remove him before the deadline because I sort of realized that I had Konza and Barco in my defense. And I sort of thought to myself that this is a bit too risky. So I upgraded Barco to Dunk, and I then just got rid of Rogers for Winks. While in a way it's good that now I have Dunk as cover for Konza, and that's actually one of the main reasons why I haven't actually used my transfer, because I do have some sort of bench cover. I'm still very jealous of Rogers owners who own him for the weeks to come, because the fixtures from Game Week 3 are really good. And it's very encouraging to sort of see that he played 90 minutes while all of the other options, Watkins, Bailey, all the other guys who were playing the attacking positions, they got subbed. But it clearly shows that the manager is showing a lot of trust in him. And he played really well according to, the numbers. The eye test showed that he played well. So, it's a case of I'm sitting here being jealous at the owners who own him. But, I don't really have him, so I'll be hoping that he blanks in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I just didn't want to have that bench headache in the coming weeks, so I just went for Harry Winks as well, just to have a non-playing midfielder. But he's definitely looks like he could be a really good price and value this season. Isn't it interesting you mentioned about Adam Armstrong there? Because I think he did look really lively. Had 5 goal attempts, 4 inside the box against Newcastle. Obviously, a Newcastle defence that was a lot more up against it because of the state of that game. And then Brereton Diaz as well, obviously with his involvement in the share incident. But he also did look quite lively in the game, 2 big chances himself. So do you think Southampton is a way that maybe managers can invest in the coming weeks, Chris? Because they've got a nice run of fixtures in the next few games, and Taylor Harwood-Bellis, for instance, he was that 4.0 defender that a lot of people were a bit bored by at the start of the season. But out of the other 4.0s, he seems like the most secure at the moment, along with maybe a Jacob Greaves from Ipswich.
Yeah, I quite like the look of Southampton's fixtures going forward. I think Adam Armstrong is just he's a good price for a penalty taker as well. I think that's one thing to consider. That was probably the reason I went for him over, say, a Liam Delap instead. at that price point. But yeah, Southampton players in general, Harwood Bellis is another player I have on my bench, and he's a player who you know is going to play 90 minutes each week. So you have that option to rotate in your back line or bring a midfielder out just to strengthen your back line. So yeah, I think that they're a good team. Maybe out of the promoted teams, they might be the best. I know Ipswich, I think from game week 3, don't have the worst fixtures either.
Yeah.
So potentially in terms of defenders, if you want more attacking upside, we've spoke about Leif Davis plenty of times on this pod, but I think Southampton players are quite good value for the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think there could be a good way to go if you've got, potentially some transfers you want to make for some of those 4.5s that aren't quite cutting it. We mentioned Kwanzaa earlier, getting that early substitution and dropping in price earlier this morning. So it's a bit of a hard pill to take for those that, didn't get the chance to make the transfer. But actually going into next week, maybe another free transfer going into game week 3 could be even more valuable than that price drop. And we always say at the start of the season that, price drops can be frustrating to start a season because you want that team value going into the early weeks, but also it's also a lot more data. It could be even more valuable, right, Bakar?
Exactly. I mean, I personally don't think that there was a right or wrong answer to selling Konsa personally. So, for example, like I mentioned with my team, I actually had Ezri Konsa and Dunk from Brighton to cover in case there was an injury to one of my defenders. I also have Porro, but at the moment I'm sort of hoping that he's going to be fine. We still don't have any concrete updates on his injury, and I have Trent along with Konsa. So I sort of felt that if Porro was fine, then I'll potentially be in a position to field 3 playable defenders this week. While I can totally understand there are others, like, let's say, I mean, I know people who have Barco. Barco is really highly owned in the community. There's Ben Johnson from Ipswich who's playing City away. These kind of guys. So when you have when you have these kind of defenders who are basically not going to contribute to your total points, and it kind of made sense to sell them because in a way your hand is forced, right? I personally do think that for those with adequate bench cover, saving the transfer potentially makes more sense because when you look at the next for few weeks, for example, Salah in is something which I am considering, and looking at both of your teams, I don't think Salah is in there. He's someone who will come in the conversation by game week 4 or 5 because in game week 4 Liverpool playing Forest at home, and game week 5 they're playing Bournemouth at home. Now, what's important is that in game week 5, City are playing Arsenal. So Salah will clearly be the standout captaincy option at home to Bournemouth. And similarly, in those 2 weeks, while Salah has Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth at home, Saka is playing Spurs away and City away, which isn't ideal either. So these swings basically mean that Salah is going to happen by game week 4 for a lot of managers. And to sort of counter the possibility of this happening, having those free transfers would be very, very valuable. So I just think having, and I haven't even mentioned Nkunku yet, right? Nkunku has not just been an option so far. I mean, with Chelsea signing so many players, he could potentially not be a regular 80 or 90-minute man like we expected him to be. So to counter sort of all these issues in the future, I think it's very, very valuable to have a transfer, which is why I ended up saving my transfer. I mean, things could still change. Porro might still be injured, in which case I may still change my mind. But with the sort of information we have available at the moment, I think that's sort of where I am with the Konsa transfer.
Yeah, I think patience and flexibility at this stage of the season is so key because more information could give us more reason to make certain transfers, and with only 1 week of data we just don't know enough, I don't think, to kind of be impulsive. But if you've got potentially injuries in there, you've got players you want to move out, a lot of mistakes you potentially think you made in game week 1, then I see the kind of merit to making a few transfers. I've had a lot of kind of looking around on social media and people saying Erling Haaland, if you don't have him ahead of game week 2, is he worth just wild carding your team and getting some City players? I personally think if you've gone for a Salah team, you should lie in your bed and you've made it. So I think you have to kind of roll with the punches a little bit, because you clearly had a plan going into game week 2, and if that's not much has changed probably from what's happened in game week 1 to change your plans that drastically, I would say. Would you agree with that, Chris, that you should just captain Salah and try and stay as resilient as possible?
Yes, definitely. I think those words really you've said, Robert, patience, resilience. You have to show them, especially at the start of the game when it's very easy to kind of follow trends and follow social media and things. It can be a bit overwhelming almost, all the different kind of team options you could have. So I think for owners of people who don't own Haaland, for example, you just have to kind of I would say probably endure the pain of this weekend, because it's probably likely he is going to contribute in some form, but you've got to hope that in the long term that your decision making will kind of come through. So I like Bakar mentioned, I don't think there's any kind of right way to play fantasy really. It's just you've got to back your own decision making and just show that conviction in the transfers you make.
Yeah, I always think like game week 2, when you're making transfers, you are just ripping up the plan you had in all those months, leading up to game week 1 in the summer when you were tinkering. You've come to a decision, and there's kind of a lot of reason behind that. So if you just kind of completely rip that up, then it seems like there wasn't much of a strong foundation behind your initial thoughts anyway. So it's probably worth backing your initial gut, because that's what you've arrived to in all those months of tinkering. And I did have a lot of tinkering in my team. It's fair to say. I was saying earlier, like, this is the most unlocked I felt pre game week 1 deadline. I just generally didn't like a lot of the options in my team, but I arrived at a team that scored 67 points, which I'm quite happy with. It could have been better, could have been a lot worse. I'm very happy with what I think standout player in my team for this week, funnily enough, Nick Pope, who, as a little differential, scored 9 points, and it was one of those things where if you paid for the premium goalkeeper this week, they ended up getting the cleans. And Pope is one that I'm just happy to leave there going forward. We know that he's got FPL history and pedigree, so I was quite happy with that. Outside of that, though, for my defence, Trent, I was very pleased to own him. He got the 8 points, and he just looked so threatening in that Ipswich game. I mean, 3 chances created. He's just playing in that role, which is allowing him to invert into midfield sometimes under slot. I think that freedom to roam is what makes him a really appealing asset. So for those that did go cheaper with their defense, I think maybe Bakar, in a few weeks' time, people will want to be moving a few funds around to get Trent in, right?
Yeah, I think he looked really good, actually. And there was this one chance where he created for Jota, which Jota narrowly missed. I think that was a big swing for owners of both, actually.
Yeah.
I'm sort of very happy that I spent the 7 million on him. And I mean, I don't have Salah or Jota in my team. And it's still sort of feels sort of reassuring to at least have some sort of cover, because Trent was very involved in the attack. So I do think that a haul will come from him in the times to come, and I think it will be soon as well. I mean, he delivered this week, but I think an even bigger haul is coming soon, a double-digit one.
Yeah, it could be an interesting thing for anyone that doesn't have like a Trent or a Gvardiol, and you've only got Salah, you captain Salah. But for those that go without Salah,
hypothetically, I'm sorry to cut you off, Roberto. Hypothetically, though, let's say if you were wildcarding this week, right? I know a few frustrated managers have pushed the button. Let's assume you were in their position. Would you have Trent? Because you will need funds for Haaland.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's going with a Haaland versus Ipswich this week. I mean, it's very difficult to sort of conceive a situation where someone is wildcarding and not owning Haaland. Similarly, you'd want Salah for the fixtures that I mentioned, game week 4 and 5. So you sort of pre-plan and you go with Salah right from the off, right? Do you really fit Trent into that team then? Because then it becomes tricky, because there's Robertson as well that you can potentially go for.
Yeah, it's tough. I think if you went for Trent and Haaland at the start, then you kind of feel quite good about it. But going into this week, I think if you hit the wild card and went fresh and prioritized Haaland, I think you probably wouldn't include Trent in that situation. I think so.
Yeah, exactly, because Salah has to come in as well, right?
Yeah, Salah. I think Salah's one that we've got to all have a plan for, because it's Salah. Like, I know Jota did well in game week 1 and got the 8 points, but how much more weeks will he start up front? Will he get as many returns to kind of justify that price drop from Salah? It's tricky. So that's the thing with FPL, is fitting in all the favorite players. We can't always do it, but one cheap option which I quite like the look of and had been in a lot of my drafts was Daniel Munoz. Pleased to see he got the assist against Brentford, despite conceding both goals. You know, he did look quite threatening, and Mitchell actually had quite a good game, especially in the first half. But happy to see Munoz come away with that assist. It's just a shame now that Anderson's gone to Fulham, so potentially some, less points maybe for that Palace defence, especially if Mark Gay makes the move to Newcastle. Do you think you'd be worried about that as a Palace defence owner with Henderson? Would you be concerned, Chris, going forward? Maybe their defence could get a bit weakened.
Yeah, apologies. I didn't actually know Anderson had completed his move yet, but for me that's ominous, really, because I think I never like investing in a defence that's kind of newly formed. If you know, it's like going into a season, because I just think it takes time for, especially at centre back, for players to kind of build relationships, kind of build that cohesion. So yeah, that is a bit worrying, owning Henderson as my keeper. But just got to go with that decision, because it's not really a position I want to be wasting the transfer on at this stage. So yeah, just hopefully, I don't know if they're lining up a replacement or whether they have someone in house already who might be taking Anderson's spot. But yeah, that is a bit concerning as a Palace defence owner.
Yeah, I think
they're in the market for a guy from Wolfsburg. Actually, they're actually in advanced talks. So we're hearing that.
But was it LaCroix?
Yeah, that's the name. That's the name.
I don't know how you pronounce it.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they could. He could come in and that Palace defense could just have just as good a chance of clean sheets and moving forward. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a different dynamic for a lot of those FPL managers that invested in that Palace defense. Now, one of the players that I was the most unsure about was that 4.5 defender, because I looked at a lot of them and I thought, don't like many of them. I looked at Mikalenko, but then I thought, well, Everton don't tend to start the season strong, so I avoided him. In the end, I landed on Ola Aina, mostly because of Forest's good start to the season with fixtures. But unfortunately, he went out with an injury, an ankle kind of roll, and it seems like a sort of calf injury that has unfortunately plagued him in game week 1. So a bit of a problem for me, because going into game week 2, I was hoping to start him. So it would potentially mean either selling Aina or starting Konza at home to Arsenal, which aren't ideal, really.
Forest are in the market for, I think they're in advanced talks to Alex Moreno as well. So that's also something to potentially monitor. That could be a problem going forward.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, with the transfer market still open, I think it's next Friday that it shuts. So there's still time for a lot of players to join the league, which could, influence our FPL teams. But yeah, Ola Aina, I'm just hoping we get some good news, and if he can just be in my team for the next couple of games where there's maybe some good clean sheet potential, then he can just go after that when potentially there's more threats to his position. But midfield wise, Smith Rowe blanked, but I wasn't too unhappy about that. Being at Fest, shout out to the guys, Gianni, Ed, and Mark Southerns for putting that on. It's always great every year. And it was really good fun to watch that for the first time, the live game on the Friday night. But watching that game, I thought Smith Rowe, he got in okay positions. It's just that Fulham, I felt, did kind of lack that final killer instincts with a lot of the decision making in the final third. So yeah, kind of a shame with Smith Rowe. But we know that he was likely to get subbed early with not facing a lot of minutes in his recent career. So I think, do you think going into game week 2 that Smith Rowe is one you should stay patient with, because those fixtures now are looking quite nice, aren't they, Chris?
Yeah, no, I like the next 2 fixtures against promoted clubs, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's a nice little spell to own Smith Rowe. Yeah, I mean, it will take him time to build up his fitness, of course, but I think if you're looking for a Fulham midfielder, he's probably the pick of them because I thought Andreas was playing a bit deeper against Man United, which is a shame. Is he still on set pieces? I
Yeah,
didn't watch the game.
he is
Right,
most.
So that might be a reason to have him instead. But yeah, I don't dislike Smith Rowe as a pick. I think he's at that price point. He's probably one of the pick of the bunch.
Yeah, and Jota we've talked about. He scored. Saka. I was very relieved to have Saka this game week because a few people went Son at the same price point, and some potentially went for Fernandes a bit cheaper. And I was just praying on Saka to get the returns with no Salah in my team. And in a way, it felt worse with Salah playing first, getting that 14-pointer. And I'm thinking, I need Saka to really deliver here. But luckily, you only got 2 points less. So I was pretty pleased with that. Do you think Saka's one that, people can just hold now back off for most of the season? Because he just looks so good, doesn't he?
I think this is one of those seasons where people will like to rotate their heavy hitters. So, for example, at the similar price point you mentioned, there's Salah, there's Saka, there's Son. We haven't discussed Palmer yet. There's Foden, potentially De Bruyne. There's all sorts of options at this price range. So what people will do is they'll hop on, hop off. I think I'm going to go with a similar strategy. I don't think anyone is going to be a season keeper, not even Haaland, to be very honest. And just like I sort of mentioned with Saka, I just think that making that move to Salah in Game Week 4 does potentially make sense because when Saka's playing Spurs away, City away, he does not exactly have the same sort of ceiling, right? So I don't think anyone's a season keeper, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good shout because having those fixture swings and being flexible with your team when certain runs of fixtures come up, I think it's good to have quite a loose structure to your 15 because if you've gone with certain players and you're kind of locked in those price points, then it makes it quite hard to be able to move with the fixtures. And I think certainly, yes, Salah will be very much a consideration in the upcoming weeks. The front three, which was pretty standard for a lot of people, I went for Haaland, Solanke, and Isak. Bit disappointed that Solanke didn't get anything, but I think it was an encouraging performance at Leicester. He looked involved. He had 3 shots in the box, and I think he's probably more of a threat at the moment this season than Son did look against Leicester. So I think I'm happier owning him for that little price, reduction compared to Son. So hopefully he can come good against Everton, as we mentioned, without potentially, a lot of them first choice defence. That could be a nice fixture for Solanke to go well in Game Week 2. So yeah, and then the bench, I've got a backup 4.0 who just doesn't play, but Valdemarsson, I'm confident Pope will play most of the weeks. Konza's there for the rotation as a 4.5 for Aston Villa. I thought he looked okay, but we know what we're going to get with Aston Villa, a team that does concede goals, unfortunately. But I think as the 4.5 options go, I think he's just a solid pick. He's going to play for a decent team. And then I've got Winks and Johnson, who it's a shame Johnson didn't play the full game against Liverpool. But he's a 5th defender anyway. I don't think it's a massive problem to be worried about going into the future weeks. So yeah, not too unhappy with that team. And going into Game Week 2, I think there's a couple of things I could do. But talking of Game Week 2, then I was interested to hear, Bakar, what your thoughts are on certain players, because looking into Game Week 2, Man City players, I think, are where people are going to be interested. If they've not already got Erling Haaland, for instance, trying to maybe get a Phil Foden or maybe a 6.5 option like a Bernardo Silva. But it's tricky because, it's not easy to cover Haaland when he is just so much better than all the rest at City. So do you think there's any players you'd be looking to buy this week in particular to Game Week 2?
I think there was one I briefly considered actually for my own team, and I think for a lot of people he's the one who sort of realistically appeals as well. He's Rico Lewis at 4.5 million because he's sort of expected to keep that spot against Ipswich, and the ceiling is there for everyone to see. Having said that, again, I think it makes sense for people who do have, let's say, an adequate defense to compensate for his absence in the later weeks, because Kyle Walker does exist, and I would expect him to come back in the team by Game Week 3 or 4. So yeah. I think as a 1-week punt, Rico Lewis is perfectly fine if, let's say, if you want to sell Konza or are in the position. But apart from that, I don't think any of their midfielders currently have the X minutes security to sort of justify picking them. So I think Haaland or no one really. I mean, Guardiola I guess, is a standard pick, which a lot of people already own. But yeah, apart from these, I don't think anyone really sort of screams must have to me.
Yeah, it feels like with Man City players, we don't know a lot about their team yet because of the fact they had a lot of, maybe their starters missing. Their system could change in the Ipswich game. If Rodri's coming back, for instance, you could see, maybe someone like a Phil Foden come in, and that could help the City attack. But I'm not sure with certain players like Gvardiol. I think he definitely gets helped by the presence of Phil Foden, because he's got someone there to find, and they've got a nice relationship they struck up last season. So yeah, I think a bit more information when it comes to Man City might be key. But yeah, it's always tempting, isn't it, to cover that Man City fixture with the potential returns it could bring. Talking of Man City, then we got a listener question sent in by Angelos. So I'll throw this over to you first, Chris, and then to Bakar. Do we think Triple Captain Haaland is a good idea? Because the game is different this year. There's not going to be as many double game weeks, and this could be potentially the best single game week chance of a nice Triple Captain return. So do you think it's a good idea for people to activate it?
Funnily enough, I was contemplating that exact move earlier this week. I think it's just the fixture being so early in the season. Haaland always starts seasons strongly, and you've seen a lot of his kind of big hauls have been at home at the early part of the season in the last couple of campaigns. So there really is a temptation there. I'm a bit more cautious, and I'd probably say I'd advise not to, just to save it, just in case there are the double game weeks later on down the line. But I think if you were going to use it on a single game week player, there's not really a better player or a better fixture that you could target, to be honest.
Because when it comes to Haaland's potential fitness right now and his minutes, pre-Champions League, we might not get a better chance. But what do you think, Bakar?
I mean, I expect him to go big this week. I don't think it's a crazy shout, to be very honest. It's not something I would do myself because I'm generally more risk averse, I guess, like Chris is. So I generally, the thing is, when I look at the double game weeks, the crucial part is to sort of realize that yes, we won't still have as many double game weeks as last season, but we'll still have some of them, around 2 to 3 possibly. So maybe even if let's say you're using the bench boost in the biggest double game of the season, there will be 1 or 2 opportunities where you will get to captain a good player in a double game week with good fixtures, right? So I just think that mentally, that extra security of having that higher floor gives me and sort of brings me at peace with captaining a player, so that at least I know that he has at least 2 shots at the dice as opposed to 1. Now I know that Haaland has a terrific fixture this week, but we may conceivably end up in a position where, let's say a Haaland or Salah or a Saka has 2 good home fixtures in a double game week, right? It could happen. And besides, there are 37 weeks of football still to play, and there's still plenty of uncertainty. 1 or 2 things, which 1 or 2 uncertain events could happen, which may change the dynamic of it. And funnily enough, we still don't know what the mystery chip is going to bring to the table, right? So who knows when is the optimal usage of that chip? So it's sort of very difficult to plan around. Currently, I think my whole focus is on maximizing the short term, and as far as chips are concerned, I'm only looking at the first wild card. But apart from that, I think I'll just leave the rest till later on in the season so that we can have more information.
Yeah, when I looked at this, I did get tempted by the triple captain, but for me, I think it's 60-40 not triple captaining, because I just think more information could tell us that using it another week could be better. Obviously, we're not going to know that until game week 2 is done, and if it does go off and he scores a hat trick or scores even more, then you might look at it and say, oh well, there was the fixture, there was the fitness there, the home game. But I still think, waiting for a bit and seeing what potential double game weeks could be later down in the line is probably the best play. We talked earlier about Phil Foden. Muntasar has asked, would you do Saka out and Foden in? Now, that's an aggressive play. Do you think, Bakar, that's worth it if you're looking at that City game and trying to get a piece of the attacking action?
I think it's a bit too aggressive for my liking, personally. What do you reckon? I mean, it could lead to points in the short term, but as mentioned earlier, valuable use of transfers later.
Yeah, I think over a long period of time, Saka probably will be worth keeping, because you know that when fixtures turn in game week 5 and 6 for Arsenal, he's going to be in everyone's teams. So it makes it tricky to justify taking him out for that short, period of time. Yes, Man City have good fixtures from game week 2 to 4, but I'm just not sure if it's worth making the kind of hokey cokey and bringing Saka back in after that. Do you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, I agree with you both. I think it's probably a short-term play if you were going to do it. But another thing with Saka is that we imagine he's still penalty taker for Arsenal, so that's another thing to consider if you were going to make that transfer. And to be honest, I know Foden did come on at half time, but with Guardiola, it's a complete roulette, isn't it? You never know who's going to play how many minutes, and whether he'll probably get subbed off early anyway if he did start against Ipswich, just to conserve his minutes. So yeah, I wouldn't be making that move if I were you.
Yeah, we've also had a question in from Cian.
Just one other thing I'd like to mention on Saka is that as things stand, he's actually one of the standout options game week 3 as well for captaincy. So Arsenal playing Brighton at home. City are playing West Ham away. I guess you can go Haaland, but it's a close call. I mean, I don't think it's clear cut.
Yeah, that's a good point you raise, actually, Bakar, because I looked at the kind of first 7 or 8 weeks and trying to think about captaincy and which players can best suit those game weeks. Saka does kind of stand out in a few game weeks as one of the standouts for a few game weeks. So I think having him is just like a nice comfort blanket. You've got him there as an option if you need him, and Arsenal just so fixture proof that it doesn't really matter about fixture swings. Obviously, definitely having him game week 5 to 6, but having him up to this point, I think is still, if you can get to Foden perhaps another way, Mutasir, then maybe go for Foden, because he could potentially start and there's high upside, even if it is just the next few weeks. But I think taking Saka out maybe is not worth it. So Cian Fahy has said Kwanzaa out before the price drop. Well, he did ask this yesterday. Obviously, the price drops now happened. But the question is, if people still have Kwanzaa at 4.4 now, do you think you would then make the transfer regardless? Because then you're downgrading to a 4.0. That's the only problem. Or would you roll the transfer for a potential wild card in game week 6 or 7? And this goes back to what we were saying earlier. Do you think the patient play here is worth it, Bakar?
Yeah, I think the answer is fairly clear. I think if you have Konsa at this position, you just keep him. Unless, I mean, the only sort of caveat is that let's assume that we hear that some popular asset, let's take Pedro Porro, for example, if he gets injured tomorrow, right? And if we know that he's out for a couple of weeks, then things change, right? And then obviously teams will be forced into making defensive transfers. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at.
Would you say, Chris, that when it comes to the budget defenders, that moving around 4.0 defenders that you think you might have got wrong at the start of the season is just a waste of a transfer? Or if you've got genuinely nothing to do you think it's worth having like a better team going into the upcoming weeks?
I think it possibly is a bit of a waste of your transfers, to be honest. I think unless there's a really glaringly obvious kind of omission from a team, for example, like they didn't play any minutes, then I wouldn't be too concerned. Like, for example, like you mentioned earlier, Ben Johnson, even though he didn't start the game, I wouldn't be too concerned, and I wouldn't be looking to ship him out just because of that. I think, as Bakar mentioned, I think it's going to be very valuable to kind of accumulate those free transfers going into after the international break, because when the fixture swings come, I think you want to be in a position where you try and minimize or try and prevent at all costs kind of having to take a hit this season. So yeah, I would roll a transfer, I think, in that scenario.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So going into game week 2, captaincy, I think, seems quite straightforward, but are we all going to say Haaland against Ipswich?
Yes, definitely.
Got to be.
I don't want to spend an afternoon behind my sofa.
Yeah, it feels like doing anything else. If you don't own Haaland, you could go for a Mohamed Salah, or potentially you could go for someone like an Everton, the Tottenham Everton, maybe go for that fixture and go for a Son or a Solanke. But yeah, if you don't own Haaland, then good luck, because it's going to be tricky, I think, in game week 2.
And part of the reason for owning Haaland in the first place was for this fixture, right? So I don't really see why the original plan should change.
Yeah, exactly. If you already own Haaland, you probably did factor in this game week into that. So for captaincy, so yeah, no, definitely that makes a lot of sense. The other thing I was going to do was quickly run through the mini league, which we made. So thanks to all that joined the head-to-head mini league. You can still join if you want, but it makes it trickier, I think, with the head-to-head. So I think at the moment we're going to leave it as it is, because that way you've got everyone up against one opponent. So at the moment we've had quite a few interesting results. I got my win in match week 1 against Augustine, 67-40, with a nice little win there. Also, we had Chris. Well done. You got your first game in the books, but it was a 55-65 to Jack Quee. So close one there, but unfortunately, no points there. And in terms of the standings at the moment, Stuart Davies, Daniel Sugar, Ollie Yeedy, Marcelo, they're all kind of looking tight at the top. So it's down to fine margins early on here. So we'll have to see, how things go in the next round of fixtures. But we'll see who gets the spoils in match week 2. You're going to be playing, Chris, up against Ahmad, and I'm up against Deepak. So let's see if we can get victorious once again. Going into then game week 2, my final question before we move on to a little quiz I've prepared. If there's one player, Chris and Bakar, that you would avoid ahead of game week 2, who do you think it is? Because we've seen a lot of transfers in. We know how volatile the kind of transfer activity is early on in the season. The likes of Mazraoui at Manchester United. We've seen a lot of people make moves like that. So do you think there's one player you'd be really intent on avoiding game week 2?
Mazraoui, I mean, you've just hit the nail on the head. I mean, I just don't like the fixtures from United. When you look at the fixtures, Brighton away, Liverpool at home, then Crystal Palace, Spurs, Aston Villa. I think United will keep probably one clean sheet in the next 6 or 7. So I just don't get why so many people are jumping on him. It's probably because of the United fan base and because of the fact that he's cheaper. Yeah. So that's why I guess he's getting a lot of traction. But yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Chris? Are there any other players you'd say is a fast avoid for game week 2?
Yeah, I think that's probably the main one. I know that Chelsea have a bit of a fixture swing of sorts over the next few game weeks that potentially owners may target. I'm not sure whether they're really in demand, Chelsea assets, but I definitely avoid defensively, particularly any Chelsea defenders. I think it's going to be a painful, as a Chelsea fan, it's going to be a painful season. I'd avoid those over the next few weeks, I think.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the Chelsea attackers, if you've gone early on a Cole Palmer or you've gone for Nkunku, you knew that the opening game was always going to be the toughest one. You've got them in for this run of fixtures that's coming up. So definitely keep your patience with those, and they should come good, hopefully, in this run. But yeah, I think when it comes to a lot of players from game week 1, it's, keep another week of data. Let's see how they can do this time around. There's very few, unless there's injuries or, problems in your team, then I wouldn't change too much when it comes to transfers in game week 2. So then, all right, what transfer plans have we got in game week 2? Have you got anything, Bakar, or are you going to be rolling your team, do you think?
I'm going to be rolling for sure. Now that we've come this far, that's the plan for me. If Porro is injured, then I may look at a defensive transfer, but as of now, I'm intent on rolling. Now that I've kept Kwanzaa for this long. I mean, I did contemplate selling him last night. I actually stayed up for till quite late, considering, whether or not to move him. I was, it sort of happens because by, Sunday, Monday, I was fairly sure at the start of the week that I won't be selling Kwanzaa because I have Dunk for cover. But then suddenly when you sort of realize that the price drop is inevitable and you start overthinking it, and then you sort of try and do your best to do whatever is in your power to avoid the drop. And then you sort of start thinking differently. but I sort of resisted the urge and temptation, and I still have him in my team, so I don't think I will be using the transfer.
Have you got any Arsenal defenders? I was interested whether you
No.
benching. Yeah, because a lot of people are looking at that. They've got maybe a Robinson of Fulham who's looked really good in that opening night, facing Leicester at home. Then you've got a Gabriel maybe away to Aston Villa, where it's good defence in Arsenal in a trickier fixture, but a lot of people favouring Robinson. I think that could be a big swing if it goes the other way around, maybe. But yeah,
it could be. Sounds like a 50-50 though.
It does feel like that. It does feel like Gabriel in the past has been a player people have benched in trickier fixtures and then turns up with a goal, and you feel like it's hard to deal with that sometimes. But I think both of those are very feasible options. Are there any transfers that you're interested in, Chris, going into this game week 2, or are you looking to roll your transfer as well?
Yes, I'll be rolling. The only kind of dilemma in my team is, well, it's not really a dilemma anymore because I've kind of got it sorted in my mind now that I did contemplate earlier in the week taking out Rodgers. I know that sounds ridiculous for Harwood Bellis, and as the week's gone on, I've realised that that's probably a terrible decision. So I'm probably not going to. But the rationale really with just Arsenal's defence for me, it's honestly fixture proof. I think any fixture they can keep a clean sheet in. I think so. I was just worried about his potential for points against Arsenal, but then where's the upside really with bringing in a Harwood Bellis? I mean, Nottingham Forest isn't a bad game to have at home as a clean sheet potential, but they are a promoted club, so I don't think I will be doing that. And Rodgers did play well, as we said, against West Ham, 90 minutes under his belt as well, so that's encouraging. So yeah, I think I'll just be rolling my transfer and keeping the same starting 11 too.
Yeah, Southampton against Forest does feel like the sort of fixture where both teams could just score, because we know both their defences are, potentially have a chance of conceding there. I think Brighton, Man United, if you've got still Barker, I think he's one that probably has to go, because it's not looking good, because he could potentially be leaving out on loan as well. Now, Palace West Ham interests me because I was looking at potentially Eze. The only thing was, whether I'd keep the patience with Rashford, but I think I probably will now. I've got 0.5 in the bank as well, kind of hoping to use that to move maybe Isak on for Watkins in game week 3 if he's 100% fit. But I think if we get no news about Aina, I'm probably going to leave Konza in at home to Arsenal. And if we do get the all clear on Aina, then I'll just start him, most likely roll the transfer and have another week of information, I think. And as we said, Haaland captain. Do you think that's a good play to go with that, Bakar?
I think so. I think you can easily save the transfer. I didn't know you had 0.5 in the bank, because now Eze is really interesting me looking at your team. That's something I would seriously consider, like potentially over saving a transfer. I think Eze, I have a really good feeling about Crystal Palace this week, especially Eze. So it's something I would recommend you to consider.
Yeah, I've definitely got it on my mind. It's just whether I guess if Aina is ruled out, then I might probably keep Rashford. But if we get no news, and if Aina is, looking fit to play, then moving Rashford to Eze is probably quite tempting for me.
But because Konza and Munoz are basically robust defenders you can play every week, right?
Yeah.
Do you really need news on Aina?
Well,
forget about him.
I was going to start him against Southampton, but it's just whether or not it's worth, because as you said, with potentially you've got Alex Moreno that could be joining Forest as well. It could be just that Aina's one that I want to move on. So whether or not that's more of a priority long term to get rid rather than selling Rashford, that's what I have to weigh up in my head. But yeah, potentially both of those could be routes I go down. Okay, well, that's interesting. That's our thoughts on game week 2. We're going to end then with a little quiz that I've got for you. So it's just one round this time. I thought I'd keep it short and sweet. So this one is based around game week 1, which we just had. So it's kind of like a back and forth until one of you can't answer. So the question I've got for you, Mohamed Salah made it 9 goals on the opening day. That's a Premier League record for the top division. So I want you to try and name me the top 7 players in Premier League history to have scored in match week 1.
Great question.
So that's top 7. How many can you name? And we'll start with our guest because we like to be accommodating. So Bakar, what are you saying for the top 7 in the Premier League Game Week 1 scorers?
So basically, there are 7 other who have outperformed Salah. Is that what you're saying?
So Salah is at the top, but
All right.
Name the top 7.
Okay. In that list, who
You
scored
could
in Game Week 1?
name Salah as one of your answers, but just one answer and then it passes to the next person.
Yeah, Salah.
Salah. Yeah, I love it.
Good.
Using the question makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about you going, Chris?
So when did FPL start then? Because that will factor into.
This is not FPL related.
No, is it not? Oh, okay. They're in high scoring on Game Week. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Number of goals. Premier League number of goals.
Didier Drogba.
Drogba is not in the top 7, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid that's a win for Bakar. But some potential answers you could have had. We've got
Rooney.
Rooney, yeah.
Lampard
was also there. Alan Shearer, Jamie Vardy, Teddy Sheringham, and Sergio Aguero. So I've got one more question for you. I had as a little backup just in case. So this question is a what we like to call on here, Bakar, a career path. So we give a few clubs
Sure.
players gone to. You've got to see if you can name the player. So I want you to tell me, who is this player, please? They started their career. Okay, I'm just thinking if this is a good option. No, we'll go for it. Their first club was Feyenoord. Then they moved to PSV. Then Newcastle United. Then Liverpool.
Wijnaldum.
That's correct. Bakar's got it. Yeah. It's a 2 win there for Bakar. Yeah, very good. What Wijnaldum is correct. Yeah, I was going to say after Liverpool, PSG, and then he of course moved on to Roma and now playing in the Saudi League. So yeah, very well done, Bakar. Thanks much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. No problem.
Time and where can people follow you? Of course, everyone's already following you on Twitter and the like. But for those that don't,
I mean, they can follow me on X, on Instagram. My handle is BigManBakar. So BigMan Bakar on Twitter and Instagram.
No, appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on, and it's been great fun talking through Game Week 2. And Chris, any last words before we wrap up?
No, well, yeah, just good luck everyone for Game Week 2. Yeah, thank you for having me on, Roberto. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, thank you, BigMan Bakar, for joining us.
Cheers, mate. Cheers.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been great, and hopefully those final decisions in Game Week 2 can be locked in. I think it's going to be an interesting one once we know how Game Week 2 shakes up. One more week after that, Game Week 3, and then we are into the international break. So a few interesting moves I think is on the horizon going into that little mini break. But yeah, good luck with Game Week 2. Make sure you captain Haaland if you've got him, and try not to make too many knee-jerk transfers. Roll with the times, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.
Cheers.